"Move your farm gate, old woman," Damon Kersey shouted through his windshield. "You're blocking a $74 million resort." Bess Carver swung the steel gate across the bright road anyway. She set the latch with one gloved hand and stepped back onto her own gravel. The lead truck braked. Behind it, the rest of the 49-vehicle convoy stacked up toward Route 38, the downhill lane clear to a turnout. Micah Poole stood half out of the lead truck's open door. Harlan Pike held bolt cutters and refused to lift them. Foxglove Lane was a private road, and it had been Bess Carver's for 31 years. If you like stories where quiet people finally draw the line, subscribe and stay with us. A second crossing waited at the back of Bess's land. Before dark, Damon would bet his grand opening on it. 42 days earlier. On the morning of August 8th, Bess raised the same latch and held it wide for the first construction truck. The cattle guard rang under its weight. Dust rose off the gravel behind it in a slow brown curtain. Her name had been there all along, white letters on green tin, screwed to the rail her husband had set before he died. Not one of the drivers coming in ever thought to read it. Up the slope beyond her greenhouses, Summit House stood, half-built, 212 rooms of glass and pale stone climbing out of the ridge. Damon Kersey had come to her porch in July with a folded site map and a warm handshake. He talked about 63 local jobs. He talked about 6 weeks of construction traffic, 16 crossings a weekday, finished by fall. He talked about what a resort would do for Hickory Bend. Weekdays only, Bess had told him on that porch. 16 crossings a day, drivers minding her customers, all of it good, only until the resort got its own way in on the north side. Damon said, of course. He was looking past her at the ridge while he said it. He never once asked who kept the road under his trucks. He never asked who graded it every spring, who paid for the culverts, whose gravel his tires were throwing. Bess noticed that. She said yes anyway. 63 paychecks in Linden County was no small thing. Besides, she had no wish to be the widow who stopped it. She watched the first truck take the curve past her seed tables and thought of a pot 2 sizes too small. Crowd roots hard enough and they quit taking water. The plant looks fine for a week, and then one morning it isn't fine at all. The county paper had already run the resort across its front page. 63 jobs, the headline said, the biggest thing to land in Linden County in 20 years. Bess kept a copy under her register. Some of those jobs had faces she knew from church. That first afternoon, a contractor's flatbed parked square across her loading slot, just as Micah Poole came down with her Friday delivery. Micah was 23, lean as a fence rail, with a clipboard on the dash and cooler crates stacked to the ceiling of his refrigerated truck. He idled there a minute, boxed out, checking his watch. His next stop was the Summit House site. That contract paid better than any other on his sheet. Bess walked out, looked the flatbed over, and waved him around to the potting bay, where there was shade and room to hand the crates across. She worked beside him for 40 minutes, one crate at a time, sweat darkening the band of her straw hat. When they finished, she counted his waiting charge into his palm in full, though not 1 minute of the delay had been hers. Micah tried to hand it back. "You didn't park that flatbed," she said. "Somebody owes you. Today it's me." Harlan Pike watched from the lane with his hard hat in his hand. He was the site foreman, 58, sun-cut, quiet, a man who noticed things and kept them filed. He put the hat back on and went up the hill without a word. By 5 o'clock, the light lay gold on the marigold rose. The first day of construction traffic was done, 16 crossings as agreed. Bess chalked the number on the little board inside her stand, the same board where she tracked her waterings, and rinsed her hands at the spigot. Damon came down at dusk in a white SUV with the resort's crest on the door. He slowed beside Harlan at the entrance and put his window down. He pointed at the nursery apron, at the hand-painted farm stand sign, at the fence with its border of orange blooms. "Fold that entrance into the construction approach Monday," he said. "We need the width." Harlan looked at the fence line, then back up at him. "That apron is hers." "It's 6 weeks," Damon said, already rolling. "She'll hardly notice." The paving crew was at her entrance Monday morning before Bess had the stand's shutters open. By 10, Hot asphalt was rolling out of a spreader across the mouth of her nursery entrance. By noon, 42 feet of her apron lay under new blacktop, curbed and coned as if it had never been hers at all. Harlan had staked a narrow opening at the north end, 1 car wide, so her customers could still pull in. Damon walked the fresh edge in clean boots, said the trucks needed the full swing, and had the stakes pulled. Harlan pointed out whose customers parked on that apron. Damon looked down the fence line at the farm stand, at the trays of zinnias, at the hand-lettered sign her husband had painted. "It's a shed with petunias, Harlan. Pave it." Micah was working a pallet jack off his truck 20 feet away. He stopped it where it stood and looked at Damon. One long look. The kind a man gives before he decides he can't afford to say anything. Harlan took his hard hat off. He held it against his leg for a moment, looking at the staked opening. Then he put it back on and waved the spreader forward. The sawhorses stayed up while the asphalt cured, through Friday, through Saturday, through Sunday. Bess did the arithmetic on her chalkboard. A good weekend day at the stand ran $960. 2 of them blocked. $1,920 gone into somebody else's driveway. She almost stood at the wet edge that first afternoon. She got as far as pulling on her gloves. Then she looked at the crew, local men, 2 of them boys she'd sold tomato starts to in April, and took the gloves back off. They were working. It wasn't their doing. Her restraint cost her the second sales day, a price she understood even while she was choosing it. The trucks were another matter. The agreement said 16 crossings a weekday. On Tuesday she chalked 31, on Wednesday 44. On Friday she stood at her register and marked the 62nd crossing of the day, tallied in the same neat strokes she used for waterings. 62 against the 16 he had shaken her hand on, nearly 4 times the promise. Every crossing dragged a tail of dust that went looking for something to land on. It found her tables. By Friday, 600 plants along the front of the lot wore a coat of gray fine as flour. Customers don't buy gray. She walked the rows and chalked the markdown, $2,700 off 600 plants if they sold it all. Micah saw it Friday when he brought the delivery. He set down his clipboard, pulled the rag off his belt, and wiped one leaf clean. Slow, careful, the green coming up bright under his thumb. Then he wiped the little price tag next to it, so Bess could read her own handwriting again. "They'll clean up," he said, not looking at her. While they stood there, a silver sedan slowed at the coned entrance, sat blinking a moment, then pulled back onto Route 38, gone. A contractor's van sat across the loading slot again, so Bess brought Micah around to the potting bay and handed crates beside him. When they were done, she paid the waiting charge in full, same as the first Friday. Micah told her she couldn't keep doing that. "Neither can they," Bess said. She caught Damon at the entrance that evening, stepping out of the white SUV to inspect his new approach, and showed him the chalkboard, the tallies, the markdown, all of it in her plain schoolroom hand. "Launch dust," Damon said, smiling at the board as at a child's drawing. "Every project makes some. It settles." "Dust settles," Bess said. "Bills don't." He was already walking his fresh paving, phone out, gone from the conversation. That week she learned what her ground thought of the arrangement. Along the fence, where 62 crossings a day had packed the earth hard, rainwater stood in a sheet Thursday morning instead of soaking in. Ground that can't breathe, can't drink. She stood over the puddle with her coffee and read it as she would read a root-bound pot. Pressure showed first. Damage came later, always surfacing somewhere you weren't watching. With the entrance coned, she moved her own stock the back way. She loaded flats into the back of her half-ton pickup, ran the gravel cut behind the greenhouses, and rattled over Juniper Creek Bridge, the little steel span her husband had painted the summer before he died. The red and white plate bolted to the rail said what it had said for 30 years, 10-ton limit. Her pickup, loaded high with annuals, weighed a shade under 3. She crossed without thinking about it twice, the boards knocking under her tires, the creek running low and clear beneath. It was just the back way, the way it had always been. Friday evening, after the last crossing of the day, Harlan came down the hill on foot. He stood at the coned entrance a while, where his staked opening would have been, while Bess watched him from the stand. He didn't come across. He didn't say anything. He picked up one cone that had fallen into her fence line, set it upright on the resort side of the new curb, and walked back up the hill in the dusk. Monday morning, a concrete truck came down with its drum turning, first of a pour scheduled for the resort's entry court. The driver, new to the site, cut the corner where the old entrance used to be. His rear wheels left the paving, bit into her ground, and backed square toward the shallow trench where her irrigation main ran under the fence. Bess saw it from 30 yards, and she was already running. "The trench," Bess shouted, but the wheels found it before her voice found the driver. She heard the pop through the ground and felt it in her boot soles. Water rose through the crushed grass along the fence as if the ground had sprung a slow leak. Her irrigation main, the one that fed every row on the front side, folded flat under the loaded truck's rear wheels. Harlan got there first. He swung up on the truck step, reached through the window, and shut the engine off himself. The hill went quiet except for the water. Damon came down the fresh paving at a walk. He looked at the wet ground, at the driver, at Harlan's hand still on the door, and said the pour was scheduled. Harlan asked for 1 hour, time enough to get her water shut off, and the line dug clear. Damon told him there was a quart to pour before it rained. "Restart it," he said. Harlan stood on the step a moment longer. Then he climbed down. The drum began turning again. The truck pulled forward over the trench a second time on its way up the hill. Bess knelt in the wet grass and worked the broken fitting free. It was brass, 30 years old, snapped clean through the collar. Her glove closed around it, water running down inside her sleeve to the elbow, cold against the August heat. She stayed like that for a breath, maybe 2. She was angry. It had taken 10 days, but she was angry now, clear through. She noted it the same as she'd note frost on a forecast, something real that had to be planned around. The plumber's bill came to $680. She paid it Tuesday and clipped the receipt to the chalkboard. 9 loads of gravel hit her delivery bay Wednesday morning, one after another, dumped in a row down the length of the wide apron behind the stand. That apron had history in it. Her husband had graded it himself, crowned so rain ran off it, sized so a semi could back to the dockboards without clipping the greenhouse corner. Every wholesale truck for 30 years had used it exactly that way. Nobody had asked. The site was short on staging room, so Damon's contractor had found some. Micah arrived at 11 with her biggest order of the season packed nose to tail, and a wholesale pickup scheduled behind it, 300 perennials bound for a landscaper in Cookville, boxed and ready on her carts. There was nowhere to put his truck. He tried the grass edge. A flagman waved him off it. He idled for 20 minutes while the site parade squeezed past him, and then he was out of time. 4 more stops sat on his sheet, and if he missed the Summit House dock window, he lost the route that carried his rent. "Go," Bess said. The Cookville order rode away still boxed. The cancellation came by phone before supper, worth $1,440. She tried to apologize to him on Friday. Micah wouldn't take it. He stood in the potting bay with his hands full of crate and shook his head once, hard. That was the end of the apology. Harlan was up on the gravel piles with a clipboard, counting loads for somebody's invoice with his back turned to both of them, never once looking their way. Gloria Ames saw the Wednesday of it happen, which was luck of a plain kind. She was the county clerk, 61, out to verify a fire number sign for the new construction address, a 10-minute errand. She stood by her car and watched a flagman wave a wholesale truck away from a business older than his boots. She said as much to Damon when he came down to meet her. That was Bess Carver's delivery bay under his gravel. He called it temporary staging. Everything out here was temporary, Mrs. Ames. Then he set a number down where the threat went. Every day the project slipped. 63 hires sat home unpaid. Unpaid hires became the county's problem. County problems became headlines. Gloria looked at him a moment, wrote something small in her book, and left it there. It was Harlan who said the thing that mattered. Bess only heard it because she was stacking empty flats inside the stand when the 2 men stopped by the scale house wall. Construction passage ended when construction ended, Harlan was saying low. That was what she'd signed. There was no agreement for an operating resort, no easement, nothing for 420 guests to drive in on. Handled, Damon said. Handled how? She'll sign whatever keeps her popular. People like her fold in the last week. They always do. Bess stood in the dark of her own stand with a stack of flats in her arms and heard herself described as a schedule item. He wasn't going to ask her. He was going to aim the calendar at her and wait. That evening she walked the fence line in the cooling dusk and took the count as she'd take stock after a storm. 42 feet of blacktop, 600 gray pots, 1 broken water line, 9 gravel piles. She said it once, out loud, to nobody, standing where her entrance used to be. It had a rhythm she didn't like, the rhythm of a list that wasn't done growing. There was a difference she knew by feel after 31 years. A stem bent by weather straightens itself in a day or two. A stem run over twice at the same spot dies at the crease, no matter how green it looks above. What was happening to her place wasn't weather. It was the same wheel at the same spot every day. Somebody was steering the wheel. Thursday, Damon stood at the corner where the lane bent past her marigold fence, watching a lowboy trailer make the turn in 4 grinding tries. He paced off the corner, heel to toe, looked at the cedar pickets with their bank of August orange, and marked the air over all of it with one flat hand. "The trucks need this swing too," he said. "Take the fence." They took the fence on a Friday morning, the 29th of August. Harlan wouldn't mark the cut. He stood at the corner with the marking paint in his hand while Damon waited, then set the can down on the paving and walked to the far side of the site. A younger operator picked it up and sprayed a line through the cedar pickets. By 9 o'clock, a skid steer had peeled out 24 feet of Bess's fence and everything banked against it. Micah came through on his morning run and found her boarder lying in the ditch. He parked, without asking anyone, and gathered what could be gathered. Crushed orange heads, snapped stems, torn roots, into a single black flat, which he set on her porch step as gently as something that had been alive. "Split these tonight and some'll take," he said. His voice came out tight with something he wasn't going to name. Bess counted later, because counting was what she had instead of shouting. 312 marigolds, pickets, rails, plants, and the labor to redo it all came to $3,120. While the skid steer worked, another crew was up on the highway edge unloading cones. The workboard by the entrance had the schedule printed plain. Approach work, Aug 29 through Sept 8. 11 days, counting both ends. The cone line ran a long funnel past her frontage. At the head of it stood a temporary sign with an arrow that bent every car toward the resort approach and away from the one narrow gap where a customer could still find her. Her stand did most of its business on impulse. People saw flowers from the highway and turned. 11 days invisible, priced at her book's own walk-in average, came to $5,460. She wrote the figure on the board, under everything the summer had already cost her. Then she stood at the chalkboard and read the season back to itself, the tally she'd been keeping since the first paving crew, the 42 feet of blacktop, the 600 gray pots, the 1 broken water line, the 9 gravel piles, and now the fence, and now 11 days behind cones. The column summed to $15,320, direct losses only, nothing padded, nothing guessed, every line with a receipt or a ledger page behind it. Damon arrived at 4 with Gloria Ames, whom he had invited personally, saying the county should see how well this could end. "I brought my book," Gloria said, and she opened it. He brought a folder he never opened, and a smile he never lost. Standing in front of the gap where her fence had been that morning, he made his offer, warm as a toast at a wedding. $15,000. 1 payment today for permanent access on Foxglove Lane, and in his telling it closed every complaint on her little board and bought her a new fence besides. For a moment nobody said anything. Micah had stopped loading. Harlan had come partway down from the site and stood by the gravel piles with his arms folded. Gloria looked up from her book. "Say the figure again, Mr. Kersey." 15,000. Gloria wrote it down. Harlan looked at the raw dirt where 24 feet of fence had stood that morning, then at Damon. Then he looked for somewhere else to put his eyes, and didn't find anywhere. The arithmetic sat right there on the board for anyone who could read. The man was offering $320 less than the damage he had already done, and calling it a purchase price for forever. Micah took the Cookville cancellation out of his shirt pocket, the sheet he'd been carrying around for a week like it needed to be somewhere. He didn't show it to anyone. He folded it twice more, small, and put it away without looking at Bess at all. He was ashamed, not of her, but of every trip he'd made up that hill since June, and of how much he needed the route that paid for the man now smiling at her. Bess wiped her hands on her apron, though they were clean. Then she gave her terms, plainly, all 4 of them, while Gloria's pen kept up. Restore the entrance to what it was. Pay the $15,320 on the board, to the dollar. Keep the trucks inside posted hours until the building was done. And build your North Road, she finished, so your resort has its own way in. The North Road is not in this year's budget, Damon said. Be reasonable. The last of it she gave slowly, so Gloria's pen could keep up and everyone standing there could serve as witness. The permission I gave in July ends at 5 o'clock in the evening on September 19th, your opening day. After 5, there is no permission on this road. Nobody will say they didn't know. 3 weeks of notice, delivered in the open, in front of the county, at her own gate. She didn't raise her voice. She sounded, if anything, like a woman reading a watering schedule. That seemed to bother Damon more than shouting would have. He reminded her, gently, as if for cameras that hadn't arrived yet, that 63 of her own neighbors drew paychecks up that hill. She answered that those 63 jobs needed a road that belonged to the resort. You've had all summer, she said. You have 3 weeks more. Some things from the beds could not be argued with. She thought of one while she watched his smile reset itself. A plant crushed above the crown can come back. A plant crushed at the crown is done. You can prop it, tie it, water it, and it will stand there green and dead for a week before it admits what it is. Damon's plan had been crushed at the crown from the start. It had no road of its own. It just hadn't admitted it yet. He got back into the SUV, through the open window, to Gloria, in the voice of a man being patient with the help. He gave his answer to all of it. Mark your calendar, Mrs. Ames. The county will have its permanent access by 5:01. He pulled out through the cone funnel. The crew finished setting the line behind him, orange as her marigolds had been, the full length of her frontage. Bess didn't spend the first cone morning grieving. She spent it building. By 8 o'clock Tuesday, she had walked a folding table straight out to the one gap the cone line allowed and set it in plain view of the highway, dead across from the sign that told drivers there was nothing down here. She stacked it with her best late summer color and lettered a board a passing truck could read. Farm stand open. Walk up, pick up here. It was the first thing she had done all summer that answered them out loud, and she did it where the whole road could see. She parked her garden wagon beside it. A customer could pull onto the wide gravel at the old church lot next door, walk 30 steps, and load out of the wagon without ever setting a tire among the cones. It wasn't her apron back, but a doorway was enough to keep the lights on. Micah did his part without being asked. He called her Monday night. One run, early, ahead of their traffic, he said. Nothing of yours sits again. He moved her standing orders to that single consolidated window so nothing got cancelled and nothing sat boxed on a cart with nowhere to go. He never said the word Cookville out loud. He just made sure it couldn't happen to her twice. The not saying was the nearest thing to an apology she would get, and she hadn't asked him for one. And Harlan, who had stopped explaining himself to anyone, kept the reclaimed strip clear. Bess had swept a narrow band of her frontage inside the cones and set her tables back along it. Twice that week, a subcontractor tried to stage equipment on it. Twice Harlan walked over and moved him off without raising his voice. He never told Bess he was doing it. She watched it happen from the register both times. The second time, he caught her looking and touched his hat brim once before he went back up the hill. That tip of the hat was the closest he had come all summer to choosing a side. None of that made the funnel honest. The head of the cone line still wore its bent arrow. The arrow still swore to every southbound car that there was nothing down here but construction. Wednesday afternoon, Gloria came out to check the posted work against the permit copy in her folder. County habit, 10 minutes. She was standing at the walk gap when a minivan slowed, read the arrow, and went on. A pickup did the same before the minivan was out of sight. Then a little hatchback with 2 kids in the back, blinker on, hesitating, and gone. That's 3, Micah said from beside the wagon, flat, a gauge reading, 3 in 10 minutes, Mrs. Ames. All day, every day, since the 29th. Gloria didn't answer. She wrote. Bess sold a flat of mums to the one customer who did brave the walk gap, counted change into a young woman's hand, and thanked her like it was any other Wednesday. The woman said she'd driven past twice before she believed the sandwich board over the arrow. She'd been buying her tomato starts here since her kids were small. She stood at the wagon an extra minute, looking down the cone line at what the summer had done to the place. Bess watched her decide not to say anything about it, and sold her a second flat of mums instead. Leaves tell you first. Any grower knows it. Roots can be dying for a week before the top shows it, but leaves turn the moment the water stops moving. If you're paying attention, the leaves are all the warning you need. Cars slowed and went on. That was her foliage. The roots underneath, the stand, the accounts, 31 years of people knowing where to turn, were still alive. But the leaves had turned, so she paid attention. Thursday, the resort's logistics got hungry. Opening sat 15 days out. The front approach was jammed with its own traffic, so Damon came down the hill hunting a second door. He found the gravel cut behind the greenhouses on a site map, put his finger on it, and told Harlan to send the furniture vans that way. Linens, kitchen fit-out, all the light freight, around the squeeze. Micah's truck idled close enough for both men to hear what came next. That crossing is a 10-ton bridge, Harlan said. Posted, and it's hers. The fix, he added, was the North Road. The North Road was survey stakes and dirt. It did not exist. The North Road, Damon answered, was also $2.6 million, and for once the sales voice dropped away entirely. I told Crescent we didn't need it. Build it now, and it breaks me. Then he was going to need her road forever, Harlan said. And you've met her. Micah leaned out his window, 23 years old and careful about it, and offered one fact free of charge. Empty, his truck might make that bridge. Loaded, he wouldn't try it on a bet, though he crossed bigger scales than any furniture van. Damon looked at the three of them, the foreman, the driver, the little crossing on the map, and filed all of it with the weather reports. He folded the map. Everything waits for the lane. He said it like the lane was his. Bess, restocking the walk gap table 40 feet away, heard the shape of it and let it go by. She had a date already. She didn't need to win any afternoons before the 19th. Monday, the 8th of September, the approach work ended and the crew lifted the cones. Bess and Micah carried the folding table back inside. By 9, her entrance, the one narrow gap of it the paving had spared, was visible from the highway again. 11 days, the 29th through the 8th, counting both ends. That evening she totaled the walk gap receipts against an ordinary early September and found the 11 days had cost almost exactly what she'd chalked in August. The figure on the board got a checkmark instead of a correction. She would have traded being right for the money. Nobody offered her that trade. Tuesday, the county paper ran the resort's front page again. Grand opening September 19. Summit House expects 420 guests. There was a photograph of the finished lobby, all glass and pale stone, and a quote from Damon Kersey about world-class hospitality coming to Linden County. There was no photograph of a road, because there was no road. Between 420 invitations and the resort they were mailed for stood one private lane, one steel gate, and a permission with 10 days and change left to live. Bess clipped the front page to the chalkboard, next to the tally, and went back to watering. On the morning of September 19th, Bess opened her stand at 7, the same as every Friday for 31 years. She watered before the heat, swept the walk, and turned the hand-painted sign to open, while the ridge above her filled with caterers' vans and the smell of cut sod. Damon was at her rail by 8, with a checkbook this time instead of a folder. One day, he wanted. Close for one day and he'd cover her full Friday take, double it, on the spot. Because 420 guests and the travel press could not have a garden shack with a sandwich board as their first sight of Summit House. The first thing they'll see is flowers, Bess said. People have survived it. He told her to name her number. She told him the county had written her terms down in August. Then she turned the sign again, needlessly, just to touch it. We're open. He left without the checkbook coming out of his jacket. What he did next, she heard about from the drivers. He called Micah's dispatcher and had her weekly delivery flagged off the run sheet. One line of pressure he could still pull. Micah showed up anyway, on schedule, with the resort's opening freight cold in the back and Bess's pallets stacked in the nose of the trailer. A site coordinator with an earpiece told him nursery freight wasn't authorized today, and that the depot could take it back if he valued his dock time. Micah looked at the man for a while, then he signed the board and kept her pallets exactly where they were, riding cold and safe against the bulkhead. "They go up after my slot," he said. "My clock, not theirs." It cost him his lunch break and maybe a write-up. Her lettuce starts rode up and down that hill twice that day rather than sit in a depot. Bess didn't learn until later what that small stubbornness had spent. At noon she did her own slow maintenance. The latch had gone stiff over a summer of other people's dust, so she pulled it, cleaned it, greased it as she did every spring, and seated it back until it moved like a thought. She filled her red thermos with coffee and set it on the flat top of the post, where it had sat through 1,000 working afternoons. Then she went back to the register. Some people keep a deadline like a grudge. Bess kept it like a watering hour, a thing the clock did, not a thing she felt. 5 o'clock had been coming since August, at the same speed as every other 5 o'clock of her life. The vendor trucks began assembling at 3, 19 of them, staged nose to tail down the resort approach and out along her frontage, waiting on the choreographed grand arrival some event planner had drawn up. Everything to sweep up the hill together in the golden hour. Trucks, then shuttles, then the invited cars, a parade for the cameras. 12 black shuttles idled along the highway edge by 4. The VIP cars came in 1s and 2s after that, 18 of them, polished like dark water. Gloria Ames arrived at 4:30 in her county sedan and parked on the church lot. She carried a single folder, closed. She said her piece at the rail without opening it. The county held the instrument on this road. She was here to put one question, at the proper hour, to the person named in it. "Nobody else on this hill can answer it," she said. Sonia Keene came behind her in a red and white marshal's truck, the county fire marshal, boots and clipboard, a woman who inspected things for a living and had the face to prove it. Bess had never met her. Gloria made the introduction. Sonia laid out where the county stood in one pass. The resort's operating sign-off carried a condition written into this project's approved operating plan, a permanent access road. No such road had been built. "I'm here to see what they intend to drive 420 people in on," she said, looking up the hill at nobody in particular. Harlan came down at 10 to 5, on foot, in his own truck's dust. He didn't come down to her. He stopped at the edge of the paving, where the new approach met her old gravel, unhooked the bolt cutters from his tool belt, and laid them out on the open bed of his pickup, off his body, in plain view, like a man emptying his pockets before church. Bess rested her eyes on the repaired latch and took the count one more time while the line grew. 42 feet of blacktop over her apron, 600 washed pots still wearing their markdowns, 1 patched water line under the fence, 9 gravel piles still walling her delivery bay. The season's ledger stood in objects within 50 feet of her. Every object had a dollar figure chalked behind it. At 2 minutes to 5, Damon came down the hill standing in the open door of the white SUV while it crawled, taking a last look at his parade. Then he dropped into the seat and took the head of the line, in front of the trucks, in front of Micah, first through by right of being Damon Kersey. Harlan walked to his window. 5 means 5, he said. He asked for 1 night of freight up the construction spur, and 1 humble phone call in the morning. That was the entire cost of doing it right. "It costs me the story," Damon said. 420 people are about to watch this gate open at 5:01. Move. The dashboard clock turned 5. Nothing on the lane moved. Bess stood with one hand resting on the top rail, nowhere near the throw, and let the minute breathe. Down the line, 49 engines idled in the gold light. 63 new hires waited up the hill in pressed uniforms. The permission she had signed in July was now a memory with witnesses. At 5:01, Damon's SUV rolled forward onto her gravel. At 5:02, his window came down. He leaned toward her with the smile finally gone and began to shout the sentence that a summer of her patience had been storing up. "Move your farm gate, old woman," Damon Kersey shouted through his windshield. "You're blocking a $74 million resort." Bess Carver swung the steel gate across the bright road anyway, It traveled its quarter circle unhurried, exactly as it had for 31 years. She set the latch with one gloved hand and stepped back onto her own gravel. The gate stood shut across Foxglove Lane for the first time since July. Micah was 6 feet behind the white SUV in the lead truck. He did the only honest thing available to a man with 420 dinners in his trailer. He braked, set the parking brake, and shut his engine off. Behind him, 18 more sets of truck air brakes let go one after another, a long ratcheting sigh moving down toward the highway. The 12 shuttles stopped behind the trucks. The rest of the polished cars stopped behind the shuttles. 49 vehicles stood still between her boundary and Route 38, and not one of them was pinned. The downhill lane remained clear to a turnout at Route 38. Under the flaggers, the convoy could withdraw in reverse order whenever its drivers chose. Nobody was being kept, they just couldn't come forward. Forward was hers. Damon was out of the SUV before the last brakes finished. He didn't come to Bess. He went straight past her to Harlan's pickup, took up the bolt cutters, and pushed them at his foreman's chest. "Cut the chain," he said. "It's scrap metal on a gravel road." Harlan took the cutters because they were his. Then he stood holding them in both hands, jaws closed, arms straight down, the way a man holds a thing he has decided will not be used. Up the hill sat every paycheck he'd drawn since spring. In front of him stood a boundary he'd watched get bought, buried, dusted, and dug up all summer. He was afraid. Anyone could see it, in the grip and the set of his shoulders, the fear of a 58-year-old man spending the job that fed his family. He spent it anyway. "No," he said. She had told Damon so in August, in front of the county, with Harlan 10 feet away hearing every word of it. "I'm not cutting a lock off another person's road, and no man of mine will either." Damon turned a slow half-circle, hunting the crew, the drivers, anyone. The evening offered him idling engines, lowered eyes, and along the highway edge, the first camera crew walking down from the ribbon stage with their lenses already up. Gloria. He found her by her sedan and aimed a finger at the gate. "You're the county. Do something about this." Gloria Ames walked past him. She came to the gate, nodded to Bess through the rails, and opened her folder at last. What was in it was one page. She raised her voice only enough to be heard 4 or 5 vehicles deep. Foxglove Lane and Juniper Creek Bridge are retained by Bess Carver, with no commercial easement to the Summit House parcel. Temporary construction permission ends at 5 p.m. on September 19, 2025. She closed the folder. That was all the county held, she said. And it was written, the end date fixed to the minute. What Bess had announced in August had only said out loud what the paper already said. It left one person on this hill with anything to decide. She turned. "Mrs. Carver, it's 12 minutes past 5. Do you extend permission?" The lane got very quiet then, the quiet of 49 engines and none of them mattering. Bess looked down the line. At Micah on his running board. At Harlan with the closed cutters. At the shuttles full of dressed-up strangers craning at their windows. At Damon in the road with the evening gold on his face and no road of his own under his feet. "No," she said. That was the whole answer. Nobody said it for her or dressed it up for her, because it needed no dressing. "Then the county recognizes no commercial passage here," Gloria said to the cameras, to the line. "None past this point." Micah leaned into his cab and keyed the fleet channel every vendor driver on the hill was monitoring. "No passage," he said. "Foxglove Gate is closed. No passage." Engine after engine shut off down the grade. The parade became a parking lot, stacked, stationary, its tail resting at the open highway. It was 5:14. The ribbon cutting was set for 5:30, on the terrace, under a banner that had cost more than her fence. The scissors were up there. So was the string quartet. Everything else, the food in Micah's trailer, the flower vans, the soundboard, the shuttles with 420 invitations distributed among them, the final walk-through inspectors, the mayor's car, 9th in the VIP line, was down here, behind a farm gate, in front of cameras that had come for a very different shot. One by one the lenses swung from the lit resort sign on the ridge to the white SUV stopped nose to rail at a nursery, and to the man beside it. Damon came back to her then. All evening he had spoken to everyone but her. He had pushed the bolt cutters at Harlan, aimed a finger at Gloria, turned a circle hunting the crew and the cameras. Now the county was spent and the crew was spent, and the only thing left in the road was the woman he had never once addressed as a person. He looked at her the way he had looked at the board in August, waiting for it to turn back into a child's drawing. Bess did not gloat. She read him the board. She knew it by heart, every line of it chalked in her own plain hand, the hand he had smiled at like a child's. 42 feet of blacktop, she said, to his face and not the lenses. 600 gray pots, 1 broken water line, 9 gravel piles, 24 feet of fence, 11 days behind cones, 1 item at a time, the way she read a watering schedule, and then the bottom line, $15,320. Every figure with a receipt behind it. He had spent a whole summer refusing to read anything of hers, not the sign with her name on it, not the board, not the arithmetic that had sat there in plain strokes for anyone who could add. Now there was nothing else in the road to look at, and his mouth moved before he chose to let it. $15,320, Damon said. It was $320 more than he had offered her in August. He heard the gap open in his own voice as he said it. That was the whole of the concession. He had no apology in him and did not reach for one. The number was enough, read back aloud, in his own mouth, to the woman who owned the road under his resort. The man who never read the sign had finally read the board. His face went white, then red. No one on the lane made a sound to cover it. Bess didn't watch him long. She had no speech in her. She had waited out a summer without raising her voice. She wasn't going to start in her own dooryard with the marigold border gone. She spoke once more, to Gloria, at a volume that let the first few windows hear and let the radio carry the rest. The road opened again, she said, when August's terms were met. The entrance restored, the losses paid to the dollar. Posted hours, and your own road on the north side, so we never do this twice. Then she nodded at the open highway behind the last bumper, anybody's for the taking, and poured her coffee and drank it standing at the rail while the light went long, a widow at a gate, outlasting a schedule. One card still lay face down in front of him. Behind the greenhouses, a gravel cut crossed the creek to the hill without ever touching her gate. Damon had never walked it. He had until dark to remember it was there. Micah, practical to the bone, ran his reefer off shore power at Bess's stand and checked his load temperatures, because whatever else the evening was, 420 dinners were still his responsibility until somebody signed for them. Then he did the one delivery on that hill still worth making. He pulled her pallets from the nose of the trailer and handed her lettuce starts across the top rail, flat by flat, without either of them opening it. Bess signed his board on the top rail. It was the first paperwork of the evening that worked exactly as intended. It belonged to a farm stand. And off to the side, from the cab of her red and white truck, Sonia Keene watched all of it without expression, an inspector at an inspection, writing in her own time. In the SUV, Damon was shouting at a phone. Crescent's event line had a helicopter question in it somewhere, and a charter bus question. None of the questions had answers that arrived before 5:30. At 5:26 he came out of the vehicle with the look of a man who had found the other door. The sales voice was back on, worse for being back on. 5:30 came and went like any other minute. Up on the terrace, the string quartet started on time, because nobody had told them not to, and played to 63 employees in pressed uniforms and an unlit ribbon. He called for Harlan and pointed past the greenhouses at the tree line, at the service track he had found on a map in September, and never once walked. Lead the trucks around, he said. Shuttles behind. The ribbon gets cut at 6. Harlan didn't move. He looked at Damon as if reading a load chart that refused to add up. When he answered, he didn't lower his voice for anyone. That track crosses Juniper Creek on a posted 10-ton bridge, he said. Your shuttles weigh 14 tons. Damon didn't wait for the arithmetic. He walked the line to the third truck back, a box van, told the driver about a service track behind the greenhouses, told the shuttles to fall in after, told the cameras nothing. The van pulled out of line and nosed toward the gravel cut. Sonia Keene was out of her truck before it had gone 20 yards. She stopped it with one raised hand, then put herself in front of Damon in the last daylight, clipboard still in hand. His operating plan, she reminded him, named that track as secondary access, and an access route that cannot carry fire apparatus is not a route at all. Nothing drives it until my engine does. She turned to Bess and asked the same as Gloria had asked, because on that hill there was only one person to ask. Would she allow a test approach? One engine, one crossing, hers alone? Yours alone, Bess said. This once. The engine came down from its station 8 minutes later. Lights and no siren. 18 tons of Linden County Fire and Rescue, and turned onto the gravel cut with Sonia walking ahead of it. Behind it, on foot, came everyone the evening had left standing. Damon, Harlan, Micah, Gloria, 2 camera crews, and a loose string of guests in party clothes picking their way along the ruts. The track ran behind the greenhouses, past the potting bay, down through the trees, to where it sat in the engine's headlights. Juniper Creek Bridge, one narrow span of riveted steel and oak planking, the creek talking low underneath. On the rail, red on white, hung the plate her husband had bolted there 30 years ago. The driver stopped short of the deck without being told. Engine crews read plates the way pilots read gauges. Sonia put her light on it and read it aloud, once, for the record and the microphones. 10-ton limit. She looked back down the track. This apparatus goes 18, nobody's crossing. Damon said the vans could go then. The light freight, the food truck, the man was standing right there. Loaded. I scale 12 tons 400, Micah said. I'm not taking that onto a 10-ton span. No honest driver would. The shuttles, Harlan said, ran 14 apiece with passengers aboard. I'm not directing one vehicle onto that bridge, not one. For a moment, Damon stood looking at the little steel crossing as he had looked at everything of hers all summer, hunting the price tag, hunting the person to lean on. The bridge just stood there in the light. It didn't have a number he could raise or a job he could threaten. It had a number bolted to its rail, and the number was 10. Sonia wrote 3 lines, flipped the clipboard shut, and delivered the county's finding in the flat voice of a woman who has closed bars and condemned porches and never once enjoyed it. Summit House has no approved fire apparatus access. Occupancy cannot proceed. This opening is suspended. The sign-off, she noted for the cameras, had been contingent from the day it was drafted on a north road that did not exist. She said all of it beside Bess's bridge, but it wasn't Bess's doing. Everyone standing in the headlights could count the reasons why. An engine that weighed 18, a truck that weighed 12.5, shuttles that weighed 14, and one honest plate that had said 10 since before the resort was a drawing. None of it surprised Bess. She had known since August that the back crossing was 10 posted tons. She had only needed to let the plate say so. They walked back up the track in the dark. At the head of the stopped line, under the event lights somebody had thoughtfully switched on, Damon Kersey stood on the bumper of his own SUV and told 420 invited guests and 2 live cameras that the grand opening of Summit House was postponed. He used the word logistics. His voice held until the last sentence. Nobody jeered him. Crescent's regional office reached him before the last taillights cleared the highway. He took the call standing in the open door of the SUV, where Gloria could see his face and the cameras could see it too. Bess watched a voice she couldn't hear walk him back a step. You don't decide the access anymore, it said, loud enough on the little speaker for the nearest driver to catch. You don't decide the site. Stand down, Damon. His hand came off the door. This time there was nowhere left to call. He had been the man who owned the hill at 9 that morning. By full dark he was a man being told where to stand on it. The next 21 days ran on Bess's terms. She watched every one of them happen in objects, not promises. A check for $15,320, the board, to the dollar. Signed passage at posted hours, running through completion and fire official approval of the North Road, with an 18-month outside date. The resort's own way in was staked in dirt at last. And crews, Harlan's crews, working to her sign-off now. The blacktop came up off her 42 feet, and the apron went back to gravel. 600 pots stood clean and green on the tables again. The fence went back picket by picket. 312 marigolds heeled in against October. Water ran under the fence line again. 9 piles of gravel left her delivery bay in a single morning. Damon came once, in the 3rd week, and stood at the edge of the new apron while his replacements did the talking. Bess sold a young couple a tray of pansies and let him stand there. There was no apology worth staging, and none required, so he left before the talking was done, and nobody on the apron turned to watch him go. The bay reopened on a Friday. Micah backed in first by Bess's own scheduling board, 8 o'clock sharp. And when he came around the trailer and saw the wide, empty gravel waiting for him, clean to the fence, he stood still a second and wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand, quick, the swipe he used for dust. Bess handed him the dock clipboard, dry-eyed. "Coffee's on," she said. On the 10th of October, at 8 in the morning, the agreed hour, Bess walked down her lane and raised the latch. Traffic waited for it now, the way it should have from the start. First came Micah's truck, right on the minute. She waved him through with 2 fingers off the rail, the red thermos steaming on the post beside her. Up the hill, 63 people were 3 weeks into paychecks that had survived their own boss. Out on the highway, a car slowed, saw orange marigolds banked bright against new cedar, and turned in at a nursery entrance that belonged, visibly and entirely, to the woman holding the gate. She kept it open the rest of the morning. It was hers to keep open. That had never changed, and now nothing on her road pretended otherwise.